Hi everyone, welcome to the first YouTube video that I have for this channel. So if you came from TikTok, hi guys, and if you don't know me, I am Vhinx, a second year nursing student, and for this channel, I'm gonna explain and discuss some ANAPHY concepts to help you understand them better for first year nursing students who are tackling their ANAPHY classes. Okay, so this video, we will tackle the skeletal system and important things that we have to know about it. Now, since nasa YouTube tayo guys, expect na mas mahaba ang discussions natin because I'll be trying to upload videos on body systems na minsanan lang or isang video lang para mas organized and so that you don't have to keep watching them per part compared sa TikTok na putol-putol. Okay guys, just a short disclaimer. My videos will not be covering everything. It will only cover important things that you have to know sa ANAPHY. So do your own studies pa rin, listen to your professor, and study well. So when I will discuss a body system, only the important things will be tackled because if we're gonna try to discuss everything, we're gonna take like hours and that's too long for a video that will just supplement your learning. So yun naman. And by the way, this is part 1 of the video. We're gonna have part 2. And sa part 2, doon na yung names ng bones, how to remember them, and we will discuss your bone healing in part 2 for skeletal system. Alright, so for our skeletal system, I'm gonna teach it or discuss it in this way. First, we'll just discuss the necessary parts, necessary structures, and then we're gonna talk about each bones or the important bones that you have to know. Kasi ang dami ng bones, hindi natin pwedeng isa't isahin yan. Yung mga importante lang na baka mag-appear sa quiz nyo or sa exams nyo. Okay, so the skeletal system is composed of bone tissue and there are 206 bones in an adult person. So 206 bones in an adult human being and they provide the framework needed for the body's movements, for the body's structure. Okay, so framework giver ang bones natin or the skeletal system. And it is not only comprised of your bone tissue, but we also have here your ligaments, that is part, and your cartilage. So that is part of the skeletal system. Okay, so first let's just discuss and let's just go over some of the functions of your bones. And number 1, I already said it earlier. First, we have the framework. They provide yung parang skeleton, mismo skeleton ng body. Kunyari, parang sa bahay, pag ginagawang bahay, may mga poste, may mga alambre. Yun yung skeleton or yun, they provide the framework. And then second, it is for support. Same as well with the first one, support. So it serves as structural support for the body. And next, protection. So our bones protect organs such as pag dito sa lungs. Our lungs is protected by the ribs. And the skull. The skull protects the brain. That is one of the main purpose of the skull, which is also our bone. And then third function is it assists with movement. So, assists with movement kasi yes, ganito. Our muscles are the ones who make things move. Pero kung walang bones na igagalaw yung muscles, hindi makakagalaw ang ating katawan. Okay? And fourth function, your bones act as calcium storage. Now, if you know, and I'm sure you know it, our bones have calcium in them and need calcium. Kaya tayo nagmi-milk para ma-supplement yung calcium na kailangan ng bones. But, calcium is also an electrolyte or is a substance in the blood that is needed in cases of nerve impulse and muscle contraction. So, alalahanin nyo guys, ang calcium, yung molecule na calcium, kinakailangan siya sa paggawa ng nerve impulse and for muscle contractions. So there will be times where later on we're going to discuss the cell that takes calcium out of the bones and puts it in the bloodstream. Pero there will be times where the blood would need calcium in it kasi mababa yung calcium levels and kukuha sila ng calcium from the bones. So yun yung ibig sabihin ng calcium storage, yung bones. Okay, and then fifth function of your bones is blood cell production. So any cell that can be found in the blood, such as your red blood cells, even cells such as your fibroblasts that can be found in the tissues, they're produced at the bones, specifically at the bone marrow. Now I'll discuss that later on in a more detailed manner. Now, in your bones, this process of creating new blood cells at the bone marrow is called hemopoiesis, or generation of blood cells. So hemopoiesis is a function of the bones. Ang hemopoiesis ay creation of new blood cells. So your RBCs, red blood cells, are created in your bone marrow and other important cells of the body. Okay, now, last function or sixth function, we could have your bones working as triglyceride storage or fat storage. Now, there's also another type of bone marrow na hindi naman gumagawa ng cells, or bone marrow where cells are not produced, but there's a different type called your yellow bone marrow that houses your fats. Yes, so they contain some adipose cells, and we'll discuss more of those later on. So your bones can be your bones again can be a fat storage or triglyceride storage due to the yellow bone marrow or even the red bone marrow containing those adipose cells. Okay, now we're gonna discuss the different types of bones according to their shape. So yes, according sa shape ng bones natin guys, may iba't ibang uri ng mga buto. So let's start with number 1. We have your short bones. Your short bones is as long as they are wide. So kunyari, a square. A square is as long as they are, as long or as tall as they are wide. So ang square, di ba, equal sides yan. So yun ang short bones natin. Now your short bones, an example are here are the wrist, the carpals, this one. So they are composed of short bones, wrist dito, and even sa feet guys. So short bones, as tall as they are wide, as long as they are wide, yun, they are short basically. Second type is your long bones. So from its description, it's already long, mahaba. An example of this is the bone that can be found inside your thigh, which is also called as your femur. So bone that is at the thigh guys is called the femur. So mahaba yan. Long bones. Now we're gonna discuss your long bones more in depth later because there are some parts in the long bones that you have to know. Okay, next, the third type, we have your sesamoid bone according to its shape. So it is shaped like a sesame seed from its name, sesamoid bone. An example of this, and this is the only sesamoid bone in our bodies guys. Take note, this is the only sesamoid bone in shape in our body, is the patella. Now where's the patella? Okay, your patella can be found at the knee. It is the bone that is located sa inyong mga knees, guys. So patella bone can be found at the knee. So it is the only sesamoid bone in shape. Remember that. And then we have another type, your fourth type of bone according to shape. It is called your flat bones. Flat sila. Now, they can be curved but they're flat in size and they're thin in shape. So an example is your skull. Now your skull is not one whole bone guys actually. It's composed of different bones connected together, which we will discuss later on, that are flat and thin and are curved. Kaya we have a head shape, diba? Round yung, or oval dito sa taas, basta ganun. Curved shape, flat siya. So flat bones. And an example also can be the sternum, your breastbone. So here. Your sternum is also a flat bone. And last type of bone according to its shape is your irregular bone. Irregular bone meaning shape niya is irregular. And the very example that I can give you for irregular bone is the bone at your vertebra or your spine because their shape is different. They look like a horned thing, ganun. Basta irregular shape yung mga vertebrae natin dito sa spine. So, yun. So again, for the shape of your bones, we have first short bones, you have your long bones, we have your sesamoid bone, we have your flat bones, we have your irregular bones. So there, 5 types of bones. Okay, so now we're gonna be discussing your short bones and your long bones regarding its inside structure, its inside parts, how it looks like on the inside because they are different. So first, your short bones, let's talk about them. So our short bones are coral-like and they have things called trabeculae. So remember, sa short bones may mga trabeculae dyan. And these trabeculae are like little holes, or if there's gonna be an image here which will show the trabeculae. So they're like, alam niyo yung sa trypophobians, yung mga malilit na butas, ganun. So they are the holes inside of a short bone. So as a short bone, okay? So your short bones are also referred to as the spongy bone because of the trabeculae kasi they look like a sponge. Dahil sa trabeculae mga small holes doon. So alalahanin nyo guys, short bones have trabeculae, short bones are the spongy bone because they look like sponge, and yun. So again, also examples of your short bone include the bone here at the wrist, the carpal bone here, and at your feet. So short bones, short sila guys, as tall as they are wide. Now, we're gonna move on to your long bone. So sa long bone, they don't have trabeculae, but instead, they have some things that are different and are really far different from your short bone. So let's take the femur for example. So the femur is once again the bone at your thighs, and it is an example of a long bone. Not the long bones. We'll start first with the structure or the part that is inside. There is a hollow thing at the middle of your long bone. That hole or hollow thing at the middle of a long bone is called a medullary cavity. So medullary cavity ang tawag doon guys. And your short bones also have different parts or regions. So I'm gonna be showing them here. So we have your epiphysis, proximal. Ibig sabihin nito, it's closest to where it is connected to. For example, yung femur natin is connected to the hip bone, to the pelvis. And the epiphysis is the closest to the hip bone. Yun. So epiphysis, yeah, proximal, and that is the topmost part. Now if we go lower there, you're gonna have your diaphysis, which is the longest part of the bone, and there the medullary cavity inside spans there. So that's your diaphysis, the longest part of the bone. In a long bone lang guys, long bone to. And then we have your metaphysis. So there are actually two metaphyses, one at the top, one at the proximal area, one at the distal area. So proximal malapit ulit sa point of connection ng bone, and then distal malayo na sa point of connection. Now, we're gonna talk about your metaphysis later kasi that has a significance in terms of growth. And then lastly, we have your distal epiphysis also. So, distal siya sa baba. Epiphysis din lang. Okay. Now, I want to talk first about your metaphysis. So, I mentioned kanina na it has a role in bone growth. Kasi ganito lang yan guys. Yung metaphysis nyo, it is not yet hardened until puberty. That's why we have guys having yung parang growth spurt because of this metaphysis. Because your metaphysis houses something called the epiphyseal growth plate. So, epiphyseal growth plate. And your epiphyseal growth plate is formed of hyaline cartilage. Now, if you came from my TikTok videos, I've talked about the different types of tissues and connective tissues specifically, and part of your connective tissue is your hyaline cartilage, and it is a cartilage. Now, in terms of epiphyseal growth plate, kaya kaya nag-grow ang isang tao to be taller kasi this is growing during puberty, meaning that part of the bone isn't hard yet because our bones are usually hard of course, pero that part isn't, it's still growing. The cells are dividing there, and during puberty, lalaki yan, and then once a certain age in puberty, it will begin to calcify and close, and that will end a person's growth. So, alalahanin nyo, metaphysis houses the epiphyseal growth plate in a long bone, specifically at the femur, and that will grow until a certain age during puberty, tas mag-harden na siya, mag-close, hindi na, or little na yung chance na tatangkad pa yung person. So now I'd like to introduce the cell there since I've already talked about the cartilage. So cells that produce cartilage are called your chondrocytes or chondroblasts. When you say chondroblasts, these are young cells, meaning they still produce and produce and produce. When we say chondrocyte, it is not a mature cell and it doesn't, or it's not as hindi na siya masyadong nagpo-produce, nag-grow tulad ng chondroblast or hindi na siya masyadong nagpo-produce ng cartilage, ganun. Okay, so the next part, I'm gonna discuss it here because there was an error with the first video. So after your epiphyseal growth plate metaphysis, we're gonna talk about the medullary cavity. So the medullary cavity houses the yellow bone marrow, and your yellow bone marrow houses what? It houses the triglyceride, the fat, the adipose cells, adipocytes. So doon yung fat storage na sinasabi nating function kanina ng bones. Now to add, the red bone marrow, the other type of bone marrow, can be found at the trabeculae of spongy bones or short bones. And it is at the red bone marrow that hemopoiesis occurs, or the production of blood cells. Okay, so now part of your long bone, we're gonna discuss something a bit more madami talaga to, guys. So bear with me. So we're gonna discuss your Haversian systems that can only be found at the long bones, okay? Haversian system. So I've also forgot to mention a while ago, kung yung short bones natin ay spongy bone, your long bones are the compact bones. Now, why is it significant to know that? Only compact bones have your Haversian system, which we will discuss now. So, alalahanin nyo, walang Haversian system si short bone kasi spongy bone siya. Ang may Haversian system lang ay yung long bones because it is your compact bone. So, the Haversian system is a unit of a compact bone. We're gonna have images here. So we have your cells here of the bone, such as your osteocyte, osteoblast, more on that later. And then we also have the central canal. Now, the central canal at the Haversian system, or the Haversian canal, is where the blood vessels run through. So this is where the supply of blood is derived from, or dito nakukuha yung supply ng dugo para ma-supply ng dugo yung bones, yung mga cells na nangangailangan ng blood dyan, ganun, for the nutrients, because your blood carries nutrients that certain cells need, certain tissues need for it to survive. So Haversian canal, central canal, we have those in your Haversian system. Okay, so now let's talk about the other parts of your Haversian system besides the central canal or the Haversian canal. So we have your osteoblasts or osteocytes, the bone cells, and they reside at things called lacunae or lacunae. So doon sila nakatira, ganun, they reside there. And then in between these cells are little canals that connect each lacunae to one another called canaliculi. Now, what's the importance of that? Importante yung canaliculi na nakakonect sa isa't isang per cell kasi sometimes a cell needs nutrients and that is where it's going to be spread kasi this part could have blood or could have the nutrients from the blood, but the other part doesn't. So it's those nutrients will travel in that canaliculi to reach the lacuna and to reach the cell that resides in that lacuna. So ganun. Yun yung use ng canaliculi, little canals. And then if you've also come from my TikTok videos, we've talked about your extracellular matrix, or in tissues, it's the things between cells. And your ECM in the Haversian system at a long bone or compact bone is referred to as lamellae. Lamellae, okay? So don't get confused, lamellae. So again, sa Haversian system natin, this is the unit of a compact bone that spans throughout the compact bone outside the medullary cavity, and it has these following structures: your central canal, Haversian canal, that has the blood vessels there para doon magagaling yung blood and nutrients na kailangan ng mga cells. Next, we have your ECM, the calcified ECM, hard ECM, called your lamellae. And then we have your osteocytes, osteoblasts. These are the bone cells, which we will discuss more in-depthly later. And we have the canaliculi that are like canals of these canals or little canals in between these cells para mag-spread ng nutrients na nangangailangan doon sa kabilang cell. And then of course we have your lacunae. This is the space where your osteocytes, osteoblasts live in. Okay, so now we've discussed that important part of your compact bone or long bone. Now, I said or mentioned a while ago yung epiphysis na part, yung parang nasa end ng dulo ng long bone. Now, that's actually trabeculated. So, it has those little spongy holes. So, that's spongy bone. Pero yung spina, yung mahaba mismo doon sa bone, sa long bone na yun, nandun yung Haversian system, medullary cavity, and that is not trabeculated. Remember, long bones are not trabeculated, only short bones. Compact bones are not trabeculated, only spongy bones. Now, let's discuss important things as well sa bones muna sa outside bago natin pag-usapan yung cells. So we have something called your periosteum. Periosteum, this is a connective tissue that surrounds your long bones on the outside. Connective tissue that surrounds your long bones on the outside, then yung periosteum, or also referred to as Sharpie's fiber. And then on top of your bones and below, on the proximal and distal part, or the epiphysis, on top of your epiphysis ng long bones, we have something called articular cartilage. Now, your articular cartilage protects the bones from abrasions while it is connected to other bones. So, nahanap siya kung saan may friction na nangyayari. So, kasi pag naggasgas yung mga bones nyo, magkakos yun ng friction, madadamage yung bones. So, we have articular cartilages in between to protect those ends of the bones para they won't scratch one another. Gets? Gets. And then, if we have periosteum on the outside, we have endosteum on the inside. And I mentioned the medullary cavity a while ago, right? So, yung medullary cavity, kunyari ito yung medullary cavity, may isa pang tissue na magsusurround dyan sa labas niya para protected yung bone marrow sa loob. That's your endosteum. It's just like your periosteum but on the inside. Okay, so now we've laid out those things. Now we're gonna get into the smaller parts of the bone, specifically your cells. And I like this part. It's more fun compared to sa diniscuss natin kanina. Anyway, okay. So the bones or the cells of the bones are the following. We have your osteoprogenitor cells, we have your osteoblast, we have your osteocyte, and we have something called your osteoclast. And we're gonna discuss them one by one each right now. Okay, let's begin with your osteoprogenitor cells. Now, your osteoprogenitor cells are bone stem cells. What are stem cells? These are undifferentiated cells. Wala pa silang specific roles. That's what it means. And once they're differentiated, they become osteoblasts. So yun lang naman yung osteoprogenitor cells. They become differentiated or parang mag-transform sila, mag-specialize sila, ganun, to become osteoblasts. Okay, now, your osteoblasts are important. These are young bone cells, young osteocells, and they now, once they're there, they begin to produce the thing that makes up the bones. It secretes a collagen fiber called osteoid. So, osteoblast secretes osteoid, which is a collagen fiber of the bones. So, dito na nako-form yung ECM. So, your osteoblasts are the producers of the extracellular matrix or the lamellae. When we call it sa bones, lamellae yung extracellular matrix. So, osteoblasts, they create the extracellular matrix called lamellae. And what they secrete is called osteoid. So, collagen fibers called osteoid that will calcify later on to form the lamellae. And paano magka-calcify yung lamellae na yun? Kasi guys, yung cartilage, yung osteoid na napo-form, hindi pa yung calcified, medyo liquidy pa siya. Now, we have a substance called your hydroxyapatite. Hydroxyapatite will harden that osteoid to form the lamellae. And then, your blasts, guys, ang blasts malalaki yan. So, osteoblast, it will shrink as it matures. It will shrink as it matures and it will produce the osteocyte or the mature bone cell. So when we say osteoblast, young cell, so palantandaan natin guys, osteoblast, it blasts out collagen fibers to produce yung lamella ng bone, but it's going to mature and shrink, magiging osteocyte na siya. So your osteocytes do not anymore produce the osteoid, but instead they shrink, and then shrink sila, di ba ganyan? Tapos meron pa yung space na tinitira nila. Pero mas maliit na sila kaysa dun. Yun yung lacuna, guys. Gets yun na? Yun yung lacuna. Anyway, so once they shrink, your osteocyte will be in charge for maintaining the lamella that was formed. So they're for maintenance of whatever they formed na nag-calcify na. So yun. And then lastly, we have your cell called the osteoclast. Kakaiba siya. Your osteoclast, it breaks down bones to get calcium so that it can bring it to the blood. So your osteoclast has a function in something called bone resorption, where they eat, it's like they eat the bones, tapos kukunin na yung calcium. Apart lang naman, hindi naman lahat. Apart lang yun, so that the calcium will be brought into the blood. Or the calcium content na nasa bone na yun, to explain it better, will be brought to the blood. Yun yung role ng osteoclast niyo for bone resorption. So, in other terms also, para mas mag-gets natin, ini-extract niya yung calcium sa bone through breaking it down, and then the calcium gained from breaking down a part of the bone will be brought sa bloodstream kasi sinabi ni katawan, parang kulang yung calcium levels sa blood, and important ang calcium, guys, sa blood kasi it's involved in nerve impulse and muscle contractions. So if the body detects that, homeostasis will kick in, and we're gonna have bone resorption so that calcium will be brought to the blood. And who does the bone resorption again? It's your osteoclast. So to just compare the two differences, para hindi kayo confused. Osteoblast, it builds. Osteoblast builds, and then osteoclast dissolves. Osteoclast dissolves or breaks down the bone. Okay, so I'd like to discuss also something called bone remodeling. So in our everyday lives, our bones can have micro fissures or small fissures kasi syempre gumagalaw tayo. Now, kailangan na mag-remodel ng bone para yung mga fissures na yun ma-fill up ulit. Especially sa mga long bones, ganun. So bone remodeling, yun lang naman yun, guys. Fixing of the micro fissures, ganun. Now, lastly, for the anatomical and physiological discussion lang, and if you notice, guys, I didn't discuss everything kasi there's a lot. I'm just discussing the important things that we need to know and understand. So, what are the factors affecting bone growth? Okay, so the following factors affecting bone growth and bone remodeling also are your minerals and your vitamins, and we have your hormones. So, vitamins, minerals, hormones affect bone growth. Now, for minerals, ang important lang na i-discuss or I will mention here is, of course, your calcium. Calcium is needed for bone growth, but so is your phosphate, your fluoride, your manganese, and the thing we call hydroxyapatite. Hydroxyapatite, yan. Now, let's go for vitamins. Vitamin A and C have a direct role in affecting bone growth. Your vitamin A affects your osteoblast in a way that it stimulates the osteoblast in producing what again? Osteoid that will become lamella once it calcifies. So vitamin A stimulates osteoblast in producing osteoid, and then vitamin C. Vitamin C is good for collagen production. Okay, now your osteoid is a form of collagen fiber, kaya importante ang vitamin C. Now, vitamin D is also important. Why? If you've come from my integumentary system videos on TikTok, I have discussed that vitamin D has a role in calcium absorption. Your body will not be able to absorb calcium properly in the body parts without vitamin D. So, useless, guys, ang vitamin, or useless ang calcium, I mean. Kunyari, minom ka ng milk pero kulang ka sa vitamin D, hindi ma-absorb no katawan mo, or hindi masyadong ma-absorb, I mean, yung calcium na yun sa loob ng yung katawan. So, vitamin D, important for calcium absorption. And we have different hormones affected. Now, we'll discuss your hormones in your endocrine system, but your hormones have an influence in bone growth. Now, that is it for this video. So, this is part 1 muna. In the next video, we'll discuss the different yung mga names na ng bones, how to remember them better. I'm sorry for my dogs, guys. And then we're gonna talk about the thing called bone healing when there's a fracture and the different types of fractures. So thank you guys for watching this video in YouTube, This marks my first video, and I'll be uploading more longer videos and discussions here that are more in-depth and more informative, but only discussing the important things. Bye-bye!